Don't move. They are watching you. Black Waitress's note made the billionaire turn pale. The rain drummed against the windows of Murphy's diner like nervous fingers tapping on glass. Richard Blackwood had chosen the corner booth deliberately, back to the wall, clear view of every entrance. At 4-2, the tech billionaire had learned that success painted a target on your back bigger than most people could imagine. He dismissed his security team for the evening, craving just 1 hour of normalcy in a place where nobody knew his name or net worth. The waitress approached with coffee, her movement steady despite the late hour. Something about her dark eyes seemed different, alert, concerned. She set down his cup and casually dropped a napkin beside it. When she walked away without a word, Richard almost ignored it. But curiosity got the better of him. He unfolded the napkin, and his blood turned to ice. In careful handwriting, someone had written, "Don't move. They are watching you." His hands trembled as he looked up, searching her face for answers. "Where are you watching from tonight?" 20 minutes earlier, Keisha Williams had been wiping down tables when the three men walked in. They didn't order anything, just took a booth near the door with perfect sight lines to the entire diner. She'd worked the night shift at Murphy's for 8 years, long enough to know when customers were really customers and when they weren't. The man in the navy jacket kept checking his watch. The one by the window had his hand resting too casually near his jacket pocket. The third one, heavy-set with cold gray eyes, never stopped scanning the room. They spoke in whispers and kept glancing toward the kitchen entrance. Keisha had grown up in a neighborhood where you learned to read danger the way other people read street signs. When the well-dressed man entered alone 15 minutes later, everything clicked into place. He was clearly wealthy, expensive suit, careful posture of someone used to being watched and protected. But tonight he was alone, vulnerable, and these three men had been waiting for exactly that opportunity. Keisha refilled coffee at nearby tables, straining to catch fragments of their hushed conversation. Words like "when he leaves" and "make it quick" made her stomach clench. She thought about her own daughter sleeping safely at home, about how this stranger's family might never see him again if she didn't act. The wealthy man, she heard someone call him Richard, sat completely unaware in his corner booth, occasionally glancing at his phone. He looked tired, maybe a little sad, like someone carrying weight that money couldn't lift. Keisha had seen that look before in the mirror during her own hardest times. She grabbed a coffee pot and a napkin, her heart pounding. Growing up, her grandmother always said, "Baby, we don't always get to choose our troubles, but we always get to choose whether we help or turn away." The lesson had cost her grandmother dearly once. She'd hidden runaway slaves in their family's root cellar more than a century ago, risking everything for strangers who needed hope. Richard looked up when she approached, and she saw kindness in his eyes despite the exhaustion. Whatever he'd done to earn his success, he didn't deserve to die for it in a roadside diner. She set down the coffee with hands that she forced to remain steady, then dropped the napkin like she was simply tidying the table. As she walked away, she felt the weight of 3 pairs of eyes following her movement. The man in the navy jacket shifted in his seat, and she realized they were tracking her every step, wondering if she'd noticed anything unusual. Her pulse hammered in her throat, but she kept her expression neutral, professional. Through the kitchen window, she watched Richard discover her note. His face went pale, then his eyes found hers across the diner. The question in his gaze was unmistakable. "Are you certain?" She gave the smallest possible nod, then turned away before the watchers could notice their silent exchange. The clock above the register showed 11:47 p.m. Murphy's closed at midnight, which meant these men would make their move soon. Richard was trapped between the wall and certain death, and somehow, a tired waitress working for minimum wage had become his only lifeline in the darkness. Richard's mind raced through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Corporate rivals, disgruntled investors. The threatening emails he'd been receiving for months suddenly felt less like empty bluster and more like genuine promises. He forced himself to take a sip of coffee, maintaining the appearance of normalcy while his world crumbled around the edges. Keisha returned to wipe a nearby table, moving close enough to whisper without moving her lips. 3 men by the door. "They've been waiting for you. Kitchen has a back exit, but they might have someone there too." Richard's stomach dropped. How had his life come to this moment? Trusting a stranger in a diner while assassins watched his every move. He thought about his daughter Claire, only 16 and already tired of his broken promises to spend more time together. If something happened tonight, their last conversation would have been an argument about her curfew. "My phone," he whispered back during her next pass. "They are watching everything." "Act normal," Keisha replied, refilling his cup with practiced efficiency. The man in the navy jacket stood up, stretching casually but moving closer to Richard's corner. Keisha's heart hammered as she realized time was running out. She thought about her own daughter, Destiny, asleep at her grandmother's house, trusting that Mama would come home safe from another ordinary night at work. Then inspiration struck, a memory of her late husband Jerome, who'd driven truck routes through dangerous territory. "Sometimes the best way out of a trap," he used to say, "is to make so much noise that running becomes impossible." She walked deliberately toward the kitchen, then suddenly stumbled, sending a full tray of dishes crashing to the floor. The sound exploded through the quiet diner like gunfire. Coffee cups shattered, silverware scattered, and every head turned toward the commotion. "Oh Lord, I'm so sorry," she called out loudly, dropping to her knees to gather the pieces. "What a mess. Somebody help me clean this up." The unexpected chaos created exactly what she'd hoped for: confusion and witnesses. Two other customers jumped up to help. The cook emerged from the kitchen to see what had happened, and suddenly the diner was alive with movement and conversation instead of tense silence. In that moment of distraction, she caught Richard's eye and mouthed a single word: "Now." Richard understood immediately. While the three men were momentarily focused on the disturbance, he slipped from his booth and headed not toward the obvious exits, but toward the restroom hallway where Keisha had indicated with a subtle gesture. The restroom had a small window, not ideal, but better than facing professional killers in an open space. As he moved, he felt a surge of gratitude toward this brave woman who'd risked her own safety for a complete stranger. If this moment of courage and human kindness touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. But as Richard reached the hallway, the heavy-set man with gray eyes suddenly stood up, his movement sharp and purposeful. He'd realized the accident was too convenient, too perfectly timed. His hand moved inside his jacket, and Keisha saw the glint of metal. Everything was about to go terribly wrong, and she was the only one who could stop it. The heavy-set man's eyes locked on Richard's retreating form, and Keisha watched in horror as his hand closed around something metallic inside his jacket. In 3 seconds, maybe 4, he'd have a clear shot at the hallway where Richard had disappeared. Without thinking, Keisha grabbed the industrial coffee pot from its burner, still scorching hot from the evening's last brew. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes doing right means doing something that scares you more than anything in the world. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, walking directly toward the gunman with the coffee pot raised as if offering a refill. "You haven't had any coffee yet. It's freshly made." The man's cold gray eyes fixed on her, and she saw recognition there. He knew she'd seen too much. But she kept walking, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "We've got decaf too, if you prefer. Most folks your age find regular coffee keeps them up all night." Her deliberate mention of his age struck its intended mark. The insult distracted him for just a moment, and in that heartbeat of confusion, she hurled the scalding coffee directly at his face and chest. His scream cut through the diner as he stumbled backward, clawing at his burned skin. The gun clattered to the floor as his companions jumped up in chaos. Keisha dove for the weapon, her fingers closing around cold metal just as the man in the navy jacket lunged toward her. "Call 911, she shouted to the other customers, who were now scrambling for the exits in panic. "Armed men. Call the police." The cook, a burly ex-Marine named Frank, emerged from the kitchen with a meat cleaver in his grip. "Nobody else moves," he barked with military authority that froze the remaining attackers in their tracks. In the restroom hallway, Richard heard the commotion and realized what was happening. This woman, this stranger who owed him nothing, was fighting for his life while he hid like a coward. The shame burned worse than any fear. He thought about his daughter Claire, about the bedtime stories he used to tell her when she was small. Stories about heroes who faced their fears, who protected the innocent, who stood up when standing up mattered most. When had he stopped being the kind of man who deserved to be anyone's hero? Richard walked back into the chaos of the main dining area, his hands raised but his voice firm. "I'm Richard Blackwood," he announced to the room. "These men came here to hurt me, but this woman saved my life." The injured gunman glared at him through watery, pain-filled eyes. "You should have minded your own business," he snarled at Keisha. "No," Richard said, stepping protectively in front of the waitress who'd risked everything for him. "She should be proud. She did something tonight that took more courage than anything I've ever done." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Keisha's hand shook as she kept the gun pointed at the floor, safety engaged the way her late husband had taught her years ago. She thought about destiny, about going home to kiss her sleeping daughter's forehead, about how different this night could have ended. Have you ever faced something like this, where doing the right thing meant risking everything? Let us know in the comments. The police were 30 seconds away, but Richard knew the real danger was only beginning to reveal itself. Detective Maria Santos arrived with 3 patrol cars, and within minutes, the diner transformed into a crime scene. The injured gunman and his companions were cuffed and led away, but their silence spoke louder than any confession. These weren't random criminals. They were professionals, and someone with serious money had sent them. Richard sat in a booth giving his statement, stealing glances at Keisha as she recounted the evening's events to another officer. Her voice remained steady, but he could see the delayed shock setting in around her eyes. She kept checking her phone, probably wanting to call home and hear her daughter's voice. "Mr. Blackwood," Detective Santos approached with a grim expression. "These men aren't talking, but we found some interesting items. Professional surveillance equipment, untraceable phones, and enough firepower to level this place. Whoever sent them wanted this done quietly, but they came prepared for war." Richard nodded, his worst fears confirmed. "Detective, the woman who saved me, Keisha Williams. She needs protection. They saw her face, and people like this don't forget." "Already arranged," Santos replied. "Safe house until we know more. But Mr. Blackwood, you need to think hard about who wants you dead badly enough to hire killers this sophisticated." The answer hit him like a physical blow. 6 months ago, his company had discovered massive fraud in a defense contract, billions of dollars stolen from military supply chains. He'd been scheduled to testify before Congress next week, armed with evidence that would destroy careers and possibly topple governments. He'd thought the threats were just intimidation tactics, but clearly someone was willing to commit murder to keep him quiet. Keisha finished his statement and approached his table, still wearing her coffee-stained uniform. Up close, he could see the exhaustion and fear she'd been hiding so well. "I need to thank you," Richard said, standing up. "What you did tonight." "You don't need to thank me," she interrupted gently. "You just need to make sure it means something. Whatever those men wanted to stop you from doing, you do it anyway. Don't let good people get hurt for nothing." Her words carried the weight of lived experience, of someone who'd seen too much injustice go unpunished. Richard realized she wasn't just a waitress who'd saved his life. She was a woman who understood exactly what kind of courage it took to stand up to powerful people who preferred the darkness. "There's going to be a congressional hearing next week," he said quietly. "Evidence about stolen military funds, money that should have bought body armor and medical supplies for soldiers. People died because of this fraud." Keisha's eyes flashed with understanding. "Then you make sure those people get justice, no matter what it costs you." Detective Santos returned with a protective detail. "Mrs. Williams, we need to get you somewhere safe. And Mr. Blackwood, you're getting a security upgrade whether you like it or not." As they prepared to leave the diner, Richard caught Keisha's arm gently. "I'm going to set up a college fund for your daughter, and I'm hiring the best security firm in the country to make sure you're both protected." If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. But as they walked toward the waiting cars, neither of them noticed the figure watching from across the street or the phone call being made from the shadows. 3 weeks later, Richard sat in a packed congressional hearing room, looking out at cameras that would broadcast his testimony across the nation. In the front row, Keisha Williams sat with her daughter, Destiny, both wearing their finest dresses for this moment that would change their lives forever. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. Names, bank accounts, forged documents, and recorded conversations that traced the stolen funds from Pentagon contracts all the way to luxury estates and offshore accounts. Richard's testimony lasted 6 hours, and when it ended, 12 high-ranking officials were led away in handcuffs. Afterward, in the quiet of his hotel suite, Richard called his daughter Claire. "Dad, I watched the whole thing," she said, and he could hear the pride in her voice. "You looked scared, but you did it anyway. That's real courage, isn't it?" "I learned that from a waitress in a roadside diner," he replied. "Sometimes the bravest people are the ones who have the least to gain and the most to lose." Keisha's life had transformed in ways she'd never imagined. The college fund Richard established would ensure Destiny could attend any university she chose. More importantly, Keisha had started a foundation that provided emergency assistance to service workers who witnessed crimes but feared retaliation. She called it Jerome's Light, after her late husband, who'd always believed in doing the right thing even when the right thing was dangerous. 6 months after that terrifying night at Murphy's Diner, Richard invited Keisha and Destiny to the opening of a new community center he'd funded in their neighborhood. As they toured the facility, complete with job training programs, childcare, and evening classes, Keisha marveled at how one moment of choosing courage over fear could ripple outward to touch so many lives. "You know what I learned that night?" Keisha told him as they watched children playing in the center's new playground. "I learned that we all have more power than we think we do. I was just a waitress worried about keeping my job, but when it mattered, I could still choose to be brave." Richard nodded, understanding now that real wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts or stock options. It was measured in the courage to protect strangers, the wisdom to use power responsibly, and the grace to recognize that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. At Destiny's high school graduation 2 years later, she gave a speech about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. She talked about her mother, who'd risked everything to save a stranger, and about a billionaire who'd learned that true success meant using his voice for justice rather than just profit. As Keisha watched her daughter accept a full scholarship to Columbia University, she thought about her grandmother's words. "We don't always get to choose our troubles, but we always get to choose whether we help or turn away." That choice, made in a moment of terror in a small diner, had changed the trajectory of not just 2 lives, but hundreds of others who would benefit from the courage they'd found together. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining us on this journey of courage, kindness, and the unexpected connections that remind us of our shared humanity.